Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the 19th official SWOG webinar. We've had a few sneaky tea and talks in there, but I count these hosted ones as the official ones. Tonight, we are joined by someone who's been with me since the beginning of the SWOG journey, and that's Brown, and he only lives up the road from me too. So tonight's webinar is Connecting to Nature, Wellbeing and Resilience Through Trees. And we've all heard about the benefits of nature connectedness, and we've had webinars on forest bathing and such like, but we're going for a different angle tonight. So I will pass you over to Brown and he will take over for the next 45 minutes. As per usual, if you save your questions for the chat, and I will compare them throughout the evening, and then we will throw the questions to Brown and he can dazzle us with the answers. So without further ado, Brown, take it away.
Oh, thank you very much indeed. It's a great pleasure to be here this evening to speak to you all. Thanks so much for logging in, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and gender rebels. You're very welcome. Now, I'm going to talk about connecting to nature, well-being and resilience through trees. I know this is a topic which often comes up in SWOG discussions, so I'll try and add a few additional things that we might not have talked about before. And also, in the second part of my talk, I'll be sharing some of my own experiences. I hope you can see the visual aids. There should be a thing up on your screen saying connecting to nature, well-being and resilience through trees.
Yeah,
It's
Brown, it's
not,
perfectly. We can see
yeah,
it. Okay.
absolutely. So it's only a PowerPoint display. It's not terribly exciting. I thought I wouldn't risk any fancy animations or embedded music or anything like that. So that'll give you something to look at whilst I'm talking. Trees were probably one of my first passions. I remember as a preschool child being preoccupied with trees and wondering what they were, trying to learn their names, collecting Brook Bond tea cards of trees of Britain and sticking them in a little book, though we never managed to get the full set, unfortunately. Those of you who are around my vintage and grew up in the UK might remember this. Anyway, then subsequently, I got a little older and went to school, and like many boys, became preoccupied with things like excavators and motor cars and so on. And it was in middle age that I came back to my passion for trees. And a few years ago, I was lucky enough to be able to buy a piece of land in Wales, where I've been planting away to my heart's content over the past few winters. And on this opening slide, you've got a few of my little things that I took over the last few days, uh, which are flourishing away and looking nice and leafy. There's a Quercus robur on the left. There's a walnut. I think that's a Juglans regia in the middle. They seem to thrive on the site, even though we're up a mountain in Wales. And there's a copper beech on the right-hand side. You can tell where I've been gardening because everything's purple. I love things with purple foliage. I know everybody goes on about the need to plant native species, but I like purple things, so I'm sure I will annoy some of the purists. Good. Okay, moving on a little bit. Nature connectedness seems to be the phrase that people use to describe the apparently positive aspects of our connection with nature, with trees, with wildlife, and with ecology. Why are we so preoccupied with nature connectedness in the present day? Over the past few centuries, human beings have been flocking to cities in search of work, in search of prosperity, in search of a better life. This goes back quite a long time. In the Enlightenment in Britain and Northern Europe and North America, there were many who felt that urban life, that city life was preferable. There's a couple of quotes here from Sidney Smith, who was a clergyman and bon viveur and a writer, essayist, and correspondent. I have no relish for the country. It is a kind of healthy grave. And there's Dr. Johnson. When a man is tired of London, he's tired of life. What there is in London, all that life can afford. People were keen in many cases, to get away from the countryside, to get away from green spaces and sample the pleasures of urban life, of entertainment, of high fashion, of parties, of the kind of camaraderie and sociability that you find in urban areas. And it is only relatively recently, in the 20th century, that people have been looking increasingly to nature as a kind of panacea for human ills, something that will make us better, something that'll improve our lives, add quality to life, improve our well-being, and so on. That really flourished, I think, in the interwar period, especially in Britain. It was at that time that those great classics of English 20th century literature, Tarka the Otter, Henry Williamson, Dr. Dolittle, Hugh Lofting, were written and widely enjoyed. Perhaps particularly after the experience of World War One, there was a lot of interest in reconnecting with the animal world, with rurality, with nature, with the soil. Um, there was a lot of flurry of interest in organic farming. Uh, Everybody remembers Oswald Mosley and the black shirts, but there was another movement, the green shirts, which are less well remembered. And well, the green shirts, well, they were concerned with things like rurality, farming, rituals, connection with nature, and so on. I shan't go into all that now, but there's a fascinating story to be told. And some of the elements in these movements, both the green shirts and the fascists, in the post-war era, where it wasn't really very suitable thing to mention in polite company, being a fascist, they started the Soil Association instead. Uh, things change, but there's a lot of interest in the mid 20th century in reconnecting with nature. Coming a little nearer the present day, um, why do we connect with nature? Why do we want to? Why is it beneficial? Well, around about 40 years ago, here's Edward O. Wilson, who promoted what he called the biophilia hypothesis. They didn't call it nature connectedness in those days, but E.O. Wilson talked about what he called biophilia. To explore and affiliate with life is a deep and complicated process in mental development, to an extent still undervalued in philosophy and religion. Our existence depends on this propensity. Our spirit is woven from it. Hope rises on its currents. In other words, connection with nature makes you feel good. Now, I suppose that's only half the story because we connect with nature, but as I shall go on to argue, very often nature connects with us. And we'll explore some of those issues in a few minutes. Edward O. Wilson spent much of his life, well, he worked on conservation projects. As a biologist, his specialism was ants. He wrote a lot about ants during his working life. Later on, he promoted what he called sociobiology. Uh, Nowadays, people talk more about evolutionary psychology. And that's largely what he's remembered for. But his career was built around ants. And nature connectedness makes us feel good. We talked about this quite a bit in SWOG seminars and webinars over the last few years. Connecting with nature, working with nature brings economic and material benefits. These days, where many of us are concerned with carbon dioxide, carbon capture and storage, well, it's possible to do this mechanically and chemically, but that technology is in its infancy. On the other hand, if you plant loads of trees, they're more or less self-building, self-repairing, fit and forget, and they'll get on with sequestering carbon dioxide and emitting oxygen. and bringing a whole variety of other benefits. And of course, trees are a source of building materials, of furniture, of energy, and much else besides. So there are a whole variety of material benefits around trees, tree planting, woodland and forest. Ecosystem services. Well, trees are associated with improvements in habitat and biodiversity. Um, they reduce soil compaction, they introduce organic matter, they reduce the likelihood of washout in the event of heavy rain, flood risk mitigation, all those kinds of things that they contribute, as well as the amenity value they have for human beings. The other thing, which I'm sure comes as no surprise to anybody here, is that people don't see trees as an undifferentiated green mass. People often have favourite trees. They may not necessarily know their Latin names, but often people have particular trees that they like to visit, that they like to climb, that they like to sit under, they like to sit in, and so on. They like to touch. Um, trees are very tactile things. Usually when people have a favourite tree, it's a mature specimen. You don't often get people who have favourites which are still only a couple of feet tall. Um, but people tend to have favourite trees. If you get people involved in tree planting schemes, it confers benefits, in terms of social connectedness, in terms of getting people out and about and doing something active, shared activity towards a common goal, makes people there feel that they're doing something about ecological and climatological problems. It somehow feels more effective than merely putting your Diet Coke cans in the recycling bin. Oh, look, I'm leaving the environment in a better place than I found it. That kind of thing. Now, these benefits of nature connectedness and doing things with trees may occur even if the experience is virtual. Uh, that even if it's a online or electronic environment which you're exploring with trees in it, that can confer some of these beneficial effects too. So, in a sense, they don't even need to be old-fashioned analog wooden trees. They can be, CGI and pixelated as well. Hmm. Another thing I'd like to mention is the 330-300 rule. Devised by environmental researchers to promote equitable access to green spaces in cities. The idea is that from where you are, where you live, where you study, where you work, it's a good idea to be able to see at least 3 well-established trees. Another thing that is focused upon mature trees rather than little titchy saplings. Um, so 3 trees. Uh, have at least 30% tree canopy cover in their neighbourhood. My goodness me, that's a very leafy suburb indeed. Um, uh, and Also within 300 metres of a high quality public green space of at least half a hectare in size. So hence 330-300. Um, I suppose these limits aren't exactly hard and fast. You don't find a sudden step change in people's well-being if they are in some way that satisfies the 330-300 rule compared to people who don't. If your green space is 305 meters away, it doesn't mean that you're doing any worse than somebody who's 300 meters away. But that gives you some idea that proximity to nature is valuable, and campaigners and activists try to feed this kind of thing into the decisions made by urban planners, builders and developers, and so on. Yes, sure enough, people who see 3 trees reported better well-being and more nature connectedness than those who didn't. So there's, evidence accumulating here. I should add that in my day job, I'm an absent-minded professor, so I tend to stick references by everything to show it's real and I'm not just making it up. Um, uh, Now, another intriguing thing that some researchers are starting to explore is the relationship between trees and spirituality. I mean, if you look at many of the mainstream religions that you find, perhaps especially in Northern Europe or in North America, you don't usually find a lot of nature worship. Not in Christianity, not in Islam, not in Judaism. Uh, okay, I suppose, Anglicans have the occasional harvest festival, but it's not really nature worship. It's not really like paganism. However, uh, people do report a certain sense of spiritual connection with trees and more broadly with nature connectedness. Even in relatively secular countries like Holland and the UK. And, it's a long time since we've had a nature-focused religion here in the British Isles. I suppose if you were to look at Christianity prior to, let us say, the Reformation or the English Civil War, if you look at things like the carvings on medieval bench ends in churches or carvings on churches, like, for example, you sometimes see the Jack in the Green figure who was believed to be responsible for making the leaves come back in the spring and making crops grow, or you find Sheila and the Gig figures carved into the sides of churches, um, a sort of female fertility symbol, if you will. So that kind of thing. In fact, in some ways, Christianity was a kind of polytheistic religion in Britain prior to the Reformation and prior to the English Civil War, the rise of Puritanism and that kind of thing. They made it monotheistic. And all these Jack in the Greens and Sheila in the Gigs and all those little fellows with pointy tails and forks and uh, the phalanxes of different species of angel, there was a major anthropogenic mass extinction event, and all of those were consigned to infidelity, consigned to history. Anyway, we haven't really done much nature worship, but spiritual connections to nature and trees are still significant issues in many people's lives. Connection with nature enhances well-being and social cohesion, understandably. I talked about shared activity towards a common goal, getting people together, doing things to connect with nature. And also, some researchers are starting to disentangle the mechanisms whereby this happens. You may have come across this idea that uh, exposure to trees, exposure to nature, uh, connects us with plants' immune systems. Plants have got phytoncides, which are part of their immune system, which help them fight bacterial, viral, and fungal infections. And these are found in the atmosphere around trees, around planting, and they can benefit humans' immune systems as well, apparently. Uh, so there's the, if you will, the psychosocial connected witness with nature, but increasingly researchers are starting to find some of these, if you will, biological connections as well. And there's more benefits to humans. Uh, Children with developmental difficulties have been noted to benefit from nature connectedness. Exposure to rurality and green spaces helps kids with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, uh, means that their symptoms are less likely to pass the clinical threshold. It can help those with an ADHD diagnosis manage their symptoms more effectively. Also, children with autism, autistic spectrum disorder. nature connectedness improves social interaction, sensory issues, communication issues, emotional regulation, and physical activity, all of which may be problems for children and young people living with autistic spectrum disorder. And nature connectedness can afford some improvement there. Maybe, but perhaps not in all cases. Uh, Sometimes being exposed to unfamiliar environments, perhaps putting people in a woodland or forest if they're not familiar with those sorts of environments, can be very distressing because kids living with autistic spectrum disorder often like familiarity and routine. Going back a couple of slides when I was mentioning that participating in tree planting schemes brings benefits to people. Well, yes, some of the time, but not always. Don't forget that if you're a professional forestry worker and you have to plant thousands of the things in commercial forestry plantations, you will very likely end up with a bad back. You'll end up with repetitive strain injury and a variety of other musculoskeletal impairments if you perform that stooped labour day in, day out with no respite. Tree planting's good if you mostly do something else for a living and just do a little bit of tree planting in your spare time. Uh, so, don't forget that these things are not uniformly good for all people under all circumstances. But in general, a bit of tree planting may help people. Exposure to wooded environments may help kids with autism and so on. What else have we got to talk about? Ooh, the other thing, going back to the idea of the biophilia hypothesis, here's a couple of things from my own plantation. Again, I noticed this a few days ago, that oak trees round about the middle of summer start a second flush of growth. And here are a couple of mine looking especially cute. These are Quercus rubra, red oak. And there they are, struggling to get my attention uh, with their little new red or bronzy coloured shoots. My goodness me. It's almost like they're waving at me. Not that I'm given to these sorts of numinous or spiritual feelings, but if I was, I'd think they were trying to catch my attention. The other thing I've noticed in my woodlands, and I think Small Woodland Owners Group is a very apposite title for me because my woodland is very small because I've only just planted it. Even so, nature is struggling to get in. Here's a couple of birds' nests I've spotted recently in trees that are barely 4 foot tall. I assumed that, my woodland would have some value for nature eventually. I hadn't realized quite how impatient nature was. The birds are nesting, maybe 2 or 3 feet off the ground. They're that keen. The other thing I've noticed as well is the way that the amount of bird song has increased in the time I've had the property. In the summer of 2018, when I was looking to buy the place, and I visited it a number of times and walked around and wondered how I was going to raise the money. And I went there with a friend one day, and he said he couldn't hear any birds. And I thought, wow. And we listened for a bit and we couldn't hear any birds. But now, after a few years rewilding and a bit of tree planting, the bird song is deafening, especially on a spring morning, which means that when I stay there, I'm wide awake by about 4:30 because the birds won't let me sleep. Um, so they're certainly moving in. Um, who else have we got? And also, once you start planting things, loads of other plants start cropping up and popping up. Things I haven't planted. There's a baby birch tree on the right that I didn't plant, and it's just decided to seed itself. There's a wild rose there growing, as usual for me, purple foliage in a copper beech hedge. I didn't plant that, and that's decided that this would be a good place to grow. So what's interesting is that once you start making some small transformations in the natural environment, a load of other stuff starts taking up residence, starts popping up, starts deciding that this might be a nice place to build a nest or might be a nice place to germinate. So the thing develops a momentum all of its own after a while. And you get little friends come to visit you. I'm sadly not very quick with the camera, but here's a few little guests who stayed still long enough to have their picture taken. There's frogs all over the place. They get everywhere. And even into my washing up. Uh, if I leave a washing up bowl soaking with some dishes in it, even though there's a lot of detergent in there, the frogs get in. I'm not quite sure why frogs like washing up liquid so much. Perhaps they just like to feel clean. That one looks pretty clean. Um, Especially on hot afternoons in the summer, the lizards come out and do a little bit of sunbathing. I think they're just the common lizard, but there's certainly plenty of them about. Some of them, like this one, a sort of khaki colour. Some of them are in a kind of British racing green, and some of them are more of a yellow colour. And there's a toad. You can see that it's got a rather pimply sort of texture. I don't think that's because it's an adolescent. I think that's just the way they're made. You can also tell, unfortunately, he's not got his face showing very well there, but toads usually have a really smug, self-satisfied expression on their faces, in my experience. So mine certainly do. That one there, I dug up while planting a tree. You can see he's on a little pile of earth there. And one of the things I've also found with the frogs and toads, if you pick them up, um, loads of water comes out all over your hand. Um, Now, I know in some parts of the world, people dig frogs up and squeeze them so they can have a drink, especially if you're in an arid area and the frogs have burrowed their way down under the ground. I'm not quite sure what happens to the frog after you've squeezed its water supply out of it, but that happens even in this country. I thought they were just peeing themselves with fright or something, but no, no, that's their water storage. They expel it when you pick them up. So nature's interacting with me. The frogs are getting into my washing up bowl. Little shrews come in my shed and wave their prehensile noses at me, begging for crumbs from my vegetarian sausage roll. Wrens perch on my threshold and have a good look at me out of one eye and then the other. So not only apropos of E.O. Wilson's observation, are we affiliating with nature? Nature's hard at work affiliating with us, if we watch it closely enough. Who else have we got? I didn't manage to snap these. I just pulled some pictures off the internet. But one of the things I saw at my place a little while ago is that hare, um, Lepus timidus, the mountain hare. That's one of the sort that turns white in the winter. And in my case, I saw one, it's about the end of November, and rather like that one there, it was a bit mottled. The white was just coming through. And at first I thought it was a domestic rabbit that had escaped. And I thought, ooh, that bunny's got awfully long legs. That bunny's got awfully long ears. Oh, I know, it's one of those hares. Now, some people believe that they're extinct in Wales, but this one didn't know he was extinct. He was there as large as life, sitting up on his tiptoes, having a good sniff at me. Um, so I hope he managed to find another one to mate with, and that there's more. And another thing I've seen, and people do believe that these exist in Wales because they've been reintroduced, is the pine marten. And my one had a lot more gingery colour underneath. That one's just got a gingery coloured bib, but I tried to find pictures that looked a bit like the ones that I'd got. So uh, there it was, as large as life, lolloping along the track in front of me. There's lots of other little things I see. I saw a thing like a tiny kangaroo. I believe it was leaping along on its back feet. It was actually in a plastic bag full of saplings that I was planting, and it ran out and hopped out of my wheelbarrow and off down the track. I wondered what it was. Could it have been a jerboa or something like that that's escaped? But then I think it probably was a wood mouse. So, and squirrels run up my legs, and much else besides. The hares come up and stay a safe distance away, but they have a good look at me and have a good sniff at me. So nature is looking back at us. It's not just that we're looking at nature. It's Probably not thinking like us. It's not phrasing its curiosities out in declarative statements, but they're certainly having a good look at us and looking at what we're doing and making use of the changes we are wreaking on the ecology. Hmm. And we've got lichen. My God, what a lot of lichen. Notice I'm pronouncing it correctly, lichen. None of this American rubbish, lichen. I still think lichen's its proper name. It's in great festoons all over the trees that have been around for a long time, and that's fascinating stuff as well. Um, it's, as you probably know, uh, a symbiotic relationship between fungi and, well, some kinds of algae, but mostly cyanobacteria. So, on the one hand, maybe it's fungi that have discovered agriculture, or maybe it's cyanobacteria that have discovered sustainable architecture, possibly one or the other. There's loads of it, and even on some of the trees I've only recently planted, you can see the grey patches starting to form on the bark. It's not like this, and that sort of growth would take a number of years to develop. Um, some people say that it's a sign of clear air, and in Wales we get a lot of westerly wind blowing in straight off the Atlantic. So it's far enough inland for it not to be too salty. Lichen thrives. I've got so much I could probably start keeping reindeer because they like to lick the lichen. So that's something that is another byproduct of reforesting and rewilding, that you start providing the habitats for these kinds of things. And because it's a symbiotic relationship, it's not a plant or animal in its own right. It I suppose, it depends. You get new forms appearing. It's a little bit further south than me, but the golden eye lichen was discovered growing in South Wales on a reclaimed coal tip, I believe. Uh, there's opportunities for new evolutions and new forms with some of these symbiotic kinds of relationships. Now, if you have a connection with nature, certainly it can be a source of well-being, of great joy and great pleasure. Um, But it can also be a source of disappointment too. I just want to point out a couple of things that can go wrong with that relationship, which the academic literature about nature connectedness and well-being hasn't really got to grips with, as far as I can tell. Here's a couple of trees that have been badly damaged by squirrels. Again, I snapped these photos on my property just a couple of days ago. On the left, there's Salix caprea goat willow that they've stripped all the bark off, and it was just catching the rising sun when I took that picture. So it looks like it's got sunburnt or something. It's looking very pink. Goat willow, I don't really mind because it seeds itself very freely all over the site and grows fairly quickly. So, if the squirrels eat the goat willow, it's no great loss. What I am a bit more concerned about is the picture on the right, where a perfectly good hornbeam saplings have been stripped of their bark. You can see one there. I got a lovely hornbeam hedge that I was very proud of. It's grown really well. Planted it the winter of 2018, 2019, and it's about twice as high as me already. But the squirrels have other ideas. So we might be concerned with sustainability. We might be concerned with ecological conservation and so on, but uh, nature has no such compunction. No, I'm a squirrel. I'm just going to strip all the bark off everything. Um, so, they don't necessarily share our ecological concerns and sensibilities. Another thing I spotted was I've got a couple of smallish ponds on my property, which I dug myself, and they're great. They retain water all the way through, even quite dry spells like the summer of 2022. And until very recently, they were teeming with pond life. I'd got tadpoles and they turned into miniature frogs. I'd got newts. And then I was using the past tense there because then I got a heron. And the heron cleaned the whole lot out. It's eaten everything apart from the blanket weed. And I did say to the heron that, do you realise you're risking a substantial fine eating those newts? You can be fined an unlimited amount, and sometimes fines handed down have been in excess of £50,000. And he just shrugged his shoulders and carried on eating my pond life. Maybe, ha ha ha, I should have sent him a warning letter, and then he wouldn't have a leg to stand on. That's one of Sarah's jokes, by the way, so which I've plagiarized mercilessly. So once again, nature doesn't necessarily share our own ecological sensibilities, and sometimes it's difficult to keep things in balance. And sometimes it can be a source of grief and disappointment when our rewilding schemes, when our planting schemes, when our favourite trees come to grief. One of the other things I would point out, which is a bit of a gap in the academic literature, all that stuff I mentioned earlier about people having favourite trees and being able to see three mature trees from your workplace, your home, or your place of study. Mostly people have looked at mature trees, big trees, but as I've indicated with some of the illustrations I've just shown, you can get a lot of pleasure and a lot of fulfillment out of saplings as well, out of the new sprouts on the little oak trees. And not just us either. Birds are getting a lot of pleasure and building their nests in even very small trees as well. So they don't have to be enormous trees, mature specimens. We and other creatures can gain a lot from little trees as well. So, if anybody's interested in doing a PhD, uh, building a name for themselves as a scholar in these matters, looking at the pleasure that people derive from kind of young trees, saplings, things where the new growth is about at eye level. That's an underexplored aspect of nature connectedness. The other thing that I've noticed is that as well as us connecting with nature, or me connecting with nature, as I mentioned, things like frogs, troads, shrews, hares, pine martens, and many other little people are having a good look at us. They're connecting with us. But other things happen too. A couple of years ago, I was noticing that something weird was happening to my skin when I'd spent time on the site. I was getting thickened, itchy patches of skin, and which I hadn't had before. And I was thinking, have I got an allergy to something? And I spent ages looking on the internet for skin allergies to various things. There's a lot of American stuff about poison ivy, and there's stuff about nettle rash and much else besides. But there wasn't anything quite like what I've got. And it was only after a while that I worked out what I'd got was some sort of fungal infection. It wasn't one of the well-known ones like ringworm, and fortunately, it was controllable by over-the-counter antifungal cream, the sort of thing that you might put on athlete's foot or something like that. So, but some sort of fungus on the site was taking up residence on me or in me. Another thing that happens, and here's some experimental vegetables that I've grown on the site. It's not predominantly a vegetable garden, but when I retire, I'd like to grow more of my own food. And you can see there's a bucket full of potatoes there, and then there's some carrots and parsnips that I just washed in a washing up bowl. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that when I go to the site, there's a kind of smell. It's very faint, but you know that you're out somewhere in nature. It smells different to a town. In fact, well, Leicester smells of people smoking dope most of the time. Um, and my rural property certainly doesn't smell like that. But it smells. And then what I've also found is that when I've eaten the vegetables, I start smelling like that as well. When I go to the loo, when I pass wind, my God, I can smell sulfane, which is the name of my property. How's that happening? Well, it's affecting my microbiome. As you probably know, most of the DNA in us or on us isn't human. It's microbes of various kinds. It's bacteria, it's protozoa, it's in some cases fungi, in some cases viruses, and so on. Um, yeah, our microbiome changes with exposure to nature. Now, this is speculation at the moment because I'm not aware of any formal research on this. But as you probably know, there's a good deal of interest in the relationship between our microbiome and our health and well-being. All the microbes that live in our guts, perhaps on our skin, and maybe elsewhere in our bodies, and the difference that this makes to our immunocompetence, our susceptibility to a variety of illnesses. So something's happening when I grow and eat my own vegetables from the site that's affecting, well, obviously I haven't done a microbial analysis of what's going on inside my body, but it certainly affects the smell. And that means that something's going on there, and it's probably the microbiome. Um, there's that other thing. I hope you'll forgive me if I conclude with a slightly off-color anecdote. One of the things I do, I like working with my hands. So although I spent most of my actual for a living working life in classrooms and committee rooms and conferences and glued to the computer screen, one of the things I find myself doing for people is unblocking their drains. Because I'm a lot cheaper than Dino Rod or any of these rip-off organizations. And what you usually find in households where they've got children is it's very often a Barbie doll or a Cindy doll that's been flushed down the toilet. And they usually wedge themselves just round the bend with their little plastic hands clinging onto the side of the pipe. Um, and so, I unblock the toilet. But, when you go in people's houses, there's often a certain kind of smell in other people's houses. And I usually used to think that was something to do with their choice of fabric conditioner or the way they cook their cabbage or something like that. But no, actually, I've unblocked enough drains to know that that is the smell of their microbiome. Uh, because it's the smell I get when I unblock the drain. And because people live together and are often eating the same food and sharing the same towels and in some cases maybe in intimate relationships, I don't know, I don't ask, it means that they share a common microbiome, and that's what you smell when you go in people's houses very often. So okay, I've been talking for just over 40 minutes, and that's fitted in quite nicely. Um, so that's a few observations about what the academic literature has to say, and a few kind of personal observations about aspects which the academic literature hasn't quite tackled yet. And you've all been very patient, so I'll shut up on this point, and we can perhaps open the floor for further discussion, questions, and yeah, so Sarah, if you'd like to
Yeah, thank you,
host
Brown.
the discussion.
Well, people have been sort of commenting on what you've been saying throughout, and it's been quite a nice community building while you've been talking, Brown. So let's just take it to the top and see what we can see. Um, so Saffron has shared her TikTok to say that in the chat to get people to join and follow. People were talking about your notion of um, having a favorite tree, which tends to be an established tree or a larger tree, and somebody saying that the monkey puzzle trees were their favorite trees, and then we were talking about people in Central Africa and Latin America do worship in various trees.
Mhm.
Um, I spoke about how my grandparents had a tree in the garden and it grew with me. So, but when I topped out at 5'2", the tree overtook me. So it was my favorite tree as it was growing. There was some questioning of whether your picture was a newt or a lizard, but we decided it's a lizard because I said that you don't have any newts at the moment because of your hungry heron.
Mhm.
Um, and then Paul says, nature is a cultural construction, and so we can be as immersed or separate from various aesthetic interpretations of it. Ecologically, we are indistinct, however.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. I can respond to that because one of the things I'm intrigued by is how conceptions of nature have changed over time and differ between different cultures.
Mm,
And for example, to medieval theologians, the Garden of Eden was very much that. It was a garden. It was cultivated and under control. And then around about the time when people like Sydney Smith and Dr. Johnson were saying that, kind of the city's where it's at, who would want to go and live in the country? We want to live in the city because it's much more fun. Um, that was around about the time the romantic movement was just getting going and the romantic poets and nature wasn't like a garden anymore. It was wild and desolate places. It was craggy rocks and waterfalls and untamed wilderness and that kind of thing. Um, so yes, certainly, once you look across the broad sweep of history or the smorgasbord of human cultures, there's a whole range of ways in which nature, if you can call it that, has been conceptualized, understood, oriented to, and worshipped in some cases. So that's something we could have a session about perhaps in the future. It might be interesting.
well, I'm feeling sort of quite satisfied and smug with myself because I had a meeting with Paul last week because he's done two of our webinars so far, and he will be doing his trilogy, finalizing this particular trilogy in August. And I said, Paul, you will get on so well with Brown. I just think that you two will get along, and that one sentence just makes me know that that's true. So I'll swap your emails so you two can get chatting because I think you probably can talk at length, you two. And then Jeffrey was talking about, was that damage caused by greys, they're notorious for bark stripping?
Oh yes, yes, grey squibbles. Actually, mine look like they've got a slight bit of a suntan. They're a little bit brindled, but they're what you'd call a grey squirrel. They're certainly not red ones.
Yeah. We spoke about it, didn't we, Brown, about how I consider the grey squirrels to be like tapas. They like to take a little sample off each tree. They sort of try to damage as many as they can, don't they? Have a
Mm,
little taste. And then somebody's put an amazing picture. So Sophie has put an amazing picture of a cedar, and everyone's
mm,
like holding hands and putting
mm,
around it. Actually, Mary, that would be quite a nice picture for us to have in the newsletter. Um, and then some people, Sue Coombs, of course, one of our other SWOG regulars, she's saying that she loves her baby trees in
mm.
reference to your larger trees idea.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then Sophie says she enjoys tree hugging on her nature or mindfulness guided walks. And then she's put a link to her Facebook. So if anybody's interested in that, go in the chat and have a look.
Mm,
Um, has anybody got any questions? These are sort of statements. Oh, here we
mm.
go. Mary asks, do you know of any research that has looked at the environmental effects on the microbiome?
Um, Now, this isn't really my area. I'm not so much a biological scientist, although uh, people have mistaken me for one occasionally. Somebody a few years ago asked me what kind of microscope I used, and I felt ever so chuffed because I haven't looked down the microscope since I was at school. But I'm not too familiar with that literature. I just hinted at it towards the end of my talk because I was aware that um, since I've been involved with this, my little project, things like fungi and presumably microbes have been getting under my skin, as it were. Um, and I wondered what that was doing to us. I haven't. There's stuff about not so much ecological effects, but things like giving people kind of a microbiome transplant. Forgive me for being gruesome. I don't know whether any of you have eaten yet this evening, but the sort of thing where people perhaps have got are immunocompromised and have a very also a very depleted microbiome, and you give them an infusion of stool from somebody else. It's like a microbiome transplant. That sort of thing is being tried out. So it's not like going out into nature and seeing what additional microbes you can pick up. But it's something that's being tried in clinical settings, which apparently has some benefits.
No,
Or all that stuff that you can buy just in the supermarket, kind of all that kind of active, usually something yogurty that's supposed to be good for you. Um,
Yakult, other brands are available.
mhm.
So and then Paul, do you want to unmute yourself? And then you could read your question about the nature connectedness literature.
Hi,
Here he is.
Oh,
can you hear me? Uh, Lovely to meet you all. Yeah, so I was late, sorry, but yeah, I was just picking up on some of the comments about when you look into the nature connectedness literature, they've sort of gone with their cultural intuitions and not really critiqued it and thought about what do we mean when we talk about nature, as Brown was just talking about,
mm,
the historical changes that have happened. And so they've sort of played out, reduced this idea, and it's sort of become very popular in the literature because it's convenient. Whereas in the anthropological literature, it talks about this breadth, this depth of different ways of perceiving the natural world, the material world, and unfortunately, we've got a lot of interesting things happening, but ultimately, it's kind of there's lots of shortcomings in the research and the practice that's based off the back of
mm.
that.
Yes, in a sense, research, not just here, but in many fields, is kind of downstream of popular culture. People take cultural commonplaces and familiar bromides, and then, especially if they're in the United States, they create a self-report questionnaire about it and hand it out to a load of people and get the results published. And oh, look, here's our nature connectedness scale. And then once one person has done it, everybody else uses it as well. That kind of thing very often happens. Hey, Brown, there are Americans here in the audience. Yes, my partner Zylia is from the United States, so we have that sort of dialogue here in our house too. Two peoples divided by a common language, as Oscar Wilde was alleged to say, or maybe it was Winston Churchill. Um, so yes, so there's lots of different natures, if you will, depending on who you ask and depending on uh, where you are in the world and at what period in history. Um, Certainly, there's a sort of nature of convenience in research and policy. It's a nature, in the present day at least, which has a lot of engineered surfaces in it, which has a lot of interpretation boards in it, which has been carefully crafted to ensure accessibility. Now, one of the things I've noticed when people come to my place in Wales is that people are somewhat unprepared for how the ground is certainly not even. It's very tussocky and lumpy and bumpy, and there are it's sometimes, for much of the year, it's very soft as well. So rather like Dr. Foster, who went to Gloucester and stepped in a puddle right up to his middle, you can certainly do that on my place. Um, People like nice flat paths. Human beings are a little bit like Daleks in that respect, who'd be lost if they ever had to leave the dead flat studio floor. And kind of what I've done more recently on my plot is mowed a few paths in it, so you can kind of walk around the place without getting scratched or stung or tripping over lumps, bumps, ants, nests, or tussocks. So there's often, and when you look at the way in which people engage with nature in popular media, one of the things, YouTube is my window on the world, and you look at all these people downsizing, homesteading, leading a simple life, and all that kind of stuff. Um, and you notice people walking about barefoot. Well, you can do that in some parts of my place where I've mowed the grass for a few months. Elsewhere, you'll be treading on gorse and thistles and brambles, and it'll be very painful, and there'll be fragments of thorn left under your skin for some time, and you have difficulty moving around very freely. But no, where it's been re-engineered and carefully manicured, it's much easier to lead a natural life. So, there's an awful lot of embodied energy in nature that you can lead a natural life in. There's an awful lot of fossil fuel in nature that you can lead a natural life in. If you just take it in its raw form, it's more or less, it's so, kind of entangled with brambles that it's, it's very difficult to get around. Um, so, kind of it's off, and it's often that nature which is the focus of research on nature connectedness. Um,
Thank you, Brian.
mm,
To bring us back to the questions, Jeffrey says that the lovely earthy smell we sense often straight after a rain shower is called petrichor. Also
mm,
known, also research has indicated that when working with soil, now I'm going to try this, actinomycetes
mm,
are released and breathed in. Well, like, the only reason I say that is because I saw the word soil. You spoke about the
mm,
Soil Association, and on August the 19th, Paul's webinar is about soil health. Isn't that right,
mm.
Paul?
Oh, great, good.
So
I'll
that
look
ties us
forward
in
to
a
that
nice
one. So
circle.
that's quite a nice segue into that. Must be the next session in this series, is it?
Yeah,
Yes,
it's a
yes.
trilogy of 3 so far, but it might be a
Mm,
Douglas Adams trilogy if I play my cards right.
yeah. Mm,
um, that
yes.
in part is what. So Paul's. Somebody asks, I work in an industry that covers chemicals in the environment, particularly PFAS in water sources. Have you come across a change in the health and activity of trees in light of these persistent chemicals being so prevalent? I mean, I think
Um,
it could be a webinar in
Well,
itself, really,
unfortunately, I haven't, I'm not a professional chemist, so I haven't really been able to um, explore that in detail. One of the things I have noticed is even in the Cambrian Mountains, there's an awful lot of plastic waste. I know digging holes for my own trees, that plastic wrap that you get on those large cylindrical hay bales or silage bales, there's
right?
tons of that just underneath the turf. A few years ago, it must have looked a real mess. Somebody had been keeping cattle on the site and just hadn't cleaned up after themselves. The streams that run across my site are full of plastic bags, and they come from somewhere upstream where um, my neighbour to the west is effectively a plastic bag farmer. He's always driving his tractor around with things in plastic bags and the shovel on the front. The cab of his tractor is made out of plastic bags, all tied together with bits of orange string. Apart from his windscreen, I think that's got glass in it still. But the strength of the structure lies in the plastic bags, and they just accumulate they blow away and they accumulate in low-lying areas and come down the valley. So that oceans are supposed to be 70% plastic these days. Well, I know where it comes from. It comes from the Cambrian Mountains and flows down out into the River Severn. Having said that, I haven't really seen many systems which don't have that kind of influence. Um, that if you were to go to, for example, parts of Western Scotland, you might not see so much of that. But then you've got other influences on the ecology. It's colder, it's windier, it's wetter. You've got more deer browsing things. So it would be difficult to isolate out all the variables. I think it's important to my own experience of rewilding. It's important to be flexible and try a variety of different species, and some of them will really flourish, and some of them won't. And some people might say it's soil pH. Some people might say it's the climate. But sometimes things that are supposed to do well in exposed conditions, like sea buckthorn, I tried that and they all died. Um, on the other hand, there's a variety of older Alnus incana that really seems to like it there, and they race away. My God, they go well, um, even with all the wind and the rain. And they've got they're an interesting thing in their own right. They've got nodules on their roots with a particular kind of bacteria called Frankia alni that don't live anywhere else. And they help the older tree fix carbon out of the atmosphere. So that's why it can grow in poor sites and waterlogged conditions. So
Fantastic. I think there's an element of sod's law as well. I think what you
Mhm.
don't want to grow well often grows well. So, and I think all of us who have a little patch of woodland can say
Yeah.
that bramble is always very
Oh yes, I mean it's wonderful. It's a real miracle plant as a pioneer. And willow, for example, goat willow seeds itself all over my site. So I tried some other things. There's lots of willow trees that you can get. There's thousands of different cultivars and species. So I tried other ones, both as cuttings and as rooted plants, and they've not done well at all. But goat willow seems to really like it there. So you just stick stuff in and see what happens. I didn't expect walnut trees to grow so well on my site, but some of them are flourishing, even though I lost a few at the beginning. Sweet chestnut, I thought might struggle a bit, at that latitude and at that altitude. But then many of them are doing very well. I'm not a million miles away from a place called Croft Castle, which is like a stately home and estate, which is famous for its sweet chestnut trees. Um, and so, some people say that they were seeded originally from the pockets of Spanish sailors from the Spanish Armada who were captured as prisoners of war. So that was why the Spanish lost. They were far too busy propagating chestnut trees. They weren't paying attention to the battle. But that's just an apocryphal story. I don't think they were. So so
well.
you try a few things and see what grows.
We do. Brown, I think this has been a very successful webinar. I think we've got people talking in the chat. We've got people swapping email addresses and getting in touch and getting connected. I think I'm gonna bin this career off and I'm gonna become a forest friend finder because I think I know everyone will get along with each other. So I
Mm.
think this has been really, really good
Yes,
fun
and if,
talk.
if anybody is in the Mid Wales area and would like to come and visit my place, I mean, Sarah's got my email, so Sarah, do feel free to pass it on,
Thank
and
you. I
we'll sort
will.
something out.
I should
And
point
equally,
out that we
if
shouldn't
if
talk to
if if any
strangers on the internet.
if any of you lot are open to visitors, do let me know. Um,
Thank you so much. I think, Brown, I think we've got some many questions that have still been left unanswered.
oh
However,
dear.
no, but
Mm.
that's okay because I can collate them and I can send them to you and I can put them up as a post or we can include the answers in a newsletter. As always, if anybody has any questions about this webinar, please email sarah@swag.org.uk. I've noticed some interesting people in the chat actually, and if anybody would like to join the community, following the lead of Paul, Sue, and Brown, and Ben Davies as also people who have been SWOG attendees and then turned SWOG presenter. Remember that's sarah@swag.org.uk and get in touch with me. Thank you very much. As always, I will have this uploaded onto YouTube easily by breakfast time tomorrow. Brown, thank you so much for the time and effort you've put into this webinar. We've all very much enjoyed it. Thank you.
Oh,
Uh,
thank you, and thanks for logging in and joining us. It's been a pleasure. And I'm only sorry we didn't have longer to continue the conversation because more comments and so on. But never mind. It means people have got an appetite for the next one. Hmm.
yeah, are you saying that you're going to be doing a trilogy as
Well,
well, Brown? Look at
I
me.
could do some more. I mean, we can because it'll take me a long time to type out individual comments and all the chat comments in the chat. But we could revisit them at a later date when you're in need of a speaker.
Bravo. Thanks. Yeah, well, I'll bite your hand off for that. So
Hmm,
I'm always trying to crowbar people to do me a webinar.
hmm.
Cool. Thank you so much. And Mary's just put in the contact details and mailing list sign up in the chat. And if you can't access that for any reason, just find us on Instagram. That's swag UK, and we're also swag UK, swag-UK on YouTube. So see you guys soon, and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Ta-ta. Night. Enjoy your tea.